I have my skirt sloper here. So I've laid it on a piece of paper that I've folded in half. So you can see this is a fold edge here. So I've got my front sloper. So I'm going to line up and make sure that the edge of the center front is right on that fold. If you need to tape it or clip it or whatever, but you need to make sure that it's right on the fold line, okay? I'm going to trace all the way around this whole sloper. I'm going to put my dart in here. I'm going to put my hip line low, high. Don't know if we're going to use the high, but doesn't hurt to have all these measurements. I'm going to make sure that I've got this line coming in here, this grain line or off center line in. So I'm going to trace all around my front. I'm going to do the same for my back. And then I'm going to take and open this up and draw my design lines on it. So I've got my pattern all traced out. This is my center, this is my front here. And I've drawn a few hip line, high and low. I've drawn another cutting line here in case I need it. So I'm just going to sort of walk you through the design process that I'm going to get to break this pattern up into the pieces that I need to make the yellow skirt. So because I want this to have like a high-low look here with my flounce, I'm going to take and draw my design line right here. So in order to get the curve that I want, I'm actually going to use this. I've decided that I want my flounce to be 7 inches deep. Remember, I made my skirt sloper 2 inches longer. So on the sides here, I want it to come in and be 7 inches. So I've got a 7-inch mark from the hem up on the side. I've also taken this line that I've got that's off-centered, and I've marked it at 7 inches. I've marked my center front at 7 inches, and I've marked this other side at 7 inches. So this is the area here where I'm going to have my skirt come up so that I have the high line here. I'll just sort of draw this by freehand right now so you can see where I'm going to get it. Then I'll use my curved ruler to get a little bit more. So I'll take this this ruler that bends. Actually, I'll put it above so you can see. So I'm just going to bring it over. Remember, I don't have any seam allowances on here. So I'm just going to use this here, get this curve kind of the way I want it. Then I can go back to one of my other rulers. So I'm going to use this ruler here, get some of this line in. I'm not worrying about intersecting at the 7-inch mark on the center front because I'm obviously going to have this coming up a little higher. So I'm just going to bring this curve in. I'm intersecting at the 7 inches here. And this area here, I want it to be a little straighter. So I'm actually going to take my straight ruler and draw my line here. So you can see this is the line that is going to create the high-low. So what I'm going to do now is this part of my skirt isn't going to change. I'm still going to have darts in it. I think for this particular one, I'm not going to put a waistband on, but I'm going to put a facing on. And I'm also going to have a center back seam. So I will show you the center back. So this is my back. Now I do have it cut on the full back, but I'm not actually going to worry about this half. I'm just going to do this half. I don't need to trace all of that. My back of my skirt flounce is going to be 7 inches. So I'm not going to have a curve in it like I did in the front. I'm going to have it come across. So I'm just going to actually take and mark at 7 inches here all the way across. And I'm going to draw a straight line connecting these these three here. So you can see this here, this is my center back. So this half here is what I'm going to work with for the back, and I'll end up with a back seam in it. So I've got my two pieces. I've got my front, I've got my back. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to separate them, and I'm going to make the flounce. So I've got my two pieces separated, so I've cut along my design line on my front here. I'm taking a measuring tape and I've laid it right on. Actually, I did this before I cut, so I laid it right on that line and I measured it out very carefully, and it came to 23 inches. Okay, so this sewing line here, whatever I attach to it, has got to be at least 23 inches long. Okay, so here I've got my skirt piece. Now I'm going to show you how to do the flounce, but I don't want I'm not going to cut a flounce that's actually going to be with a hoop in it here. So it's actually going to be a straight piece, so that when it's sewn on, it will come up a little higher at the front and then go back down at the side and across the back. So I'll show you the back piece, and then I'm going to show you how to take your flounce. So there's my back piece, and so I've done the same thing. I've separated this 7 inches from the back. Okay, so this piece essentially is ready for me to take and take to my paper and add my seam allowances all on it, make sure my grain line's the same for the front piece. So this piece is my front, so it has to have seam allowances added onto it. It'll have to have a seam allowance down here across the front. I'll make the facing for that in a minute too. So I'm going to show you how to do the flounce. Move these pieces out of the way. All right, so I have my piece here that I'm going to actually turn into a flounce. So I don't want it to have a peak up here. So I've taken and I've drawn lines. I've split my front up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 segments. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take, and I only want this flounce to be 7 inches long. So I'm actually going to take my ruler and I'm just going to connect one side to the other, because I know here was 7 inches. So now my flounce, everything above here, I'm going to cut off. I'm not going to use it all. Okay, so we're just going to use this straight piece down here. So before I start cutting all of these and moving them around, remember how I said in order for this flounce to fit across the front, it has to be 23 inches long. So if I measure from side to side, I'm coming in at just over 20 inches here. Okay, so I'm going to be short by about 3 inches. We don't have to be 100% accurate, because you can go a little over. So 3 inches is a little more than what I need to get me to 23, but I can ease that. It's not even a half an inch. I can ease that across here and you won't even see it going in. So let's just say that I have 1, 2, 3, this is an opening as well, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 7 openings. So I'm going to take that 3 inches and I'm going to spread it across these 7 openings at the top. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to actually mark these. So I'm putting all the numbers in. That way I won't get confused at how many I have. Okay, so I'm going to cut this off. So cutting this extra piece off here. Okay, so I've got this cut off. So I've taken my calculator and I've figured out I need to figure out how much I need to add at the top here in order to get the right length of this flounce at the top to fit smoothly into the top of the, or onto the bottom of the skirt. So I've calculated out that I need approximately 3/8 of an inch for each opening. So I'm going to finish cutting these. Last couple here. Now I want to spread at the bottom of these openings. I want to spread each one. I'm going to see what it looks like if I spread each one 2 inches. So this is where you're going to need either a clear ruler that you can see all your marks on. So I'm going to start, because I know this is going to spread out, I'm going to start this right. I'm going to have to move my, actually let's move these up here so you can, we aren't losing. Okay, so here's number 1. So I'm going to tape number 1 down. Okay, so I have number 1 taped down. At the top, before I tape number 2, I need to mark off 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so this is where, right here is 3/8 of an inch. This is where the top of number 2 is going to go. But at the bottom, I want to spread it. So I'm going to spread it by 2 inches down here. So I'm going to move this out of the way here, and I'm going to mark over at the 2-inch mark. So you see I've got a mark here at 2, I've got a mark there at 3/8. So the number 2 piece is going to get taped right along here. So you see I'm starting to spread this out. My number 3 piece, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to mark over from the edge of the 2. I'm going to mark over 3/8 of an inch at the top and 2 inches at the bottom. And then I'm going to tape this piece down, matching the top and bottom to those 2 lines. Okay, so you can see my flounce is starting to spread. I'm starting to get a bit of a curve here. Same thing, I'm going to do the same for number 4. 3/8 at the top and 2 inches at the bottom. Line these 2 up. Just going to tape here. Tape at the bottom. So here's my curve coming along. At the end we can go and take a nice ruler and get that curve at the top and the bottom. Okay, so same thing, number 5. You may not want as big of a flare on your bottom, your flounce at the bottom, so you could do this at 1.5. So I'm just gonna tape this down, actually. Get that there. Okay, so we've got 5, and you can see what's happening. I'm getting curved here. So note to self, bring your strips down a little bit farther. I'm going to end up having to probably tape a piece on up here. Same thing, I'm just going to get this marked over at 3/8 at the top, 2 inches at the bottom. So I've still got 2 more. I've still got 7 and 8 to do. So yes, I'm going to have to tape a piece on here, which I will stop and do and meet you back here in a minute. Okay, so you can see I've got all of my pieces taped on here. So now I'm just going along and I'm just sort of joining up the bottom, making sure that I join from piece to piece, connecting all the bottoms. So I've got a curve happening at the bottom. You see I've got a curve across the top. So when I cut this out, I'm only going to have to cut one, because this is the flounce piece that's going to go all the way around the front, on the front. Now the only thing I want to have on here is I want to know where the top of my high-low point is at the front. So I had made a couple of marks here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the piece that I cut off, and I'm lining it up at the sides. So I'm just lining it up here, and I'm actually taking and just laying this out and connecting this back till I get to where the marks that I made at the top. And then on here, so on the top of this flounce, this is going to be my notch. So this will obviously be cut out as one piece. So if this is the front, so we want to make sure that you cut this out with the right side up, if the right side of your skirt is coming up with the high-low peak on it. So there's my front piece drafted out. No seam allowances on it yet. I still have to go in and put a seam allowance, decide what my hem is going to be, if I'm going to put just a narrow little narrow hem, or if I'm just going to serge and do a rolled hem on the serger. That's acceptable for what you're doing here. And you know, do all my marks. So I will take this and make it into a proper production pattern. So I'm going to go through this again with the back. So this is the piece I've cut off the back. And what I did was I actually just folded this in half and then folded it again to get the 4 lines that I'm actually going to be cutting. So I'm now going to take and same thing, because this is a straight piece, I don't have to cut anything off the top. I do know that I am going to have this cut on the fold. So I will be putting this on the fold when I get it done. The other thing is, because this was straight at the back, I don't have to accommodate and spread it at all like I did at the top by adding that 3/8. I can actually just spread it at the bottom, okay? So what I like to do, just so I don't forget, is I like to have a nice straight line to start, and I'm going to tape this down here. We're going to tape this down near the bottom on here. Okay, and I'm also going to make sure that I have it indicated that it is going to be cut on the fold. So I don't have to spread it at the top, and I've actually just got a very small hinge. I have to spread it at the bottom though, 2 inches. So we're still spreading the same as we did on the front. So I can actually just sort of draw a little line there, but if I get my tape ready, I can just tape it. Take my other side down. I'm going to go to the next piece. And because this is the back, there's only 4, actually there's 3 folds here. Okay. So next piece, same thing. Make sure that you've got it marked. Okay, so on the back here, I've split it. I have 3 openings. On the front, you remember, I had 7 openings across the front. Actually, I had 8 openings across the front. Here I've only got 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually spread it at the side another 2 inches. So that will give me 4 openings, or 8 openings. Actually, I'm going to spread it half. Sorry, not a whole, because we had 7 openings. We had 8 pieces on the front, but we had 7 openings. So I want half to go on one side. So I'm going to mark this at 1 inch on this side. So remember, this is getting cut on the fold. So the other side of this piece will have the other inch. Okay, so the other side will have the other inch. So that will equal 7 spreads, just like we had across the front, to have the same curve as you do on your front piece. So there again, I'm going to mark out my curve. I did draw a couple of mark lines on the back which correspond to the back of the skirt, so you can extend them here and make notches there. You can make sure that you make a notch at your center back. Make sure that you join up all your sides here. Okay, so now, like I say, this is going to get cut on the fold, so I'll have one piece for the back and one for the front. And if you make sure that your back notches, you have 2. And when you make your notch for your front, I'm just going to fold this down so I can spread this out again. So the front here, I would just take this peak. I've got 2 here, so I'm going to actually erase one. I only want, so I've got one notch here. So I'll know that this piece is going on the front because I've only got 1 notch and it's on one side. You can decide that you're going to notch your side seams. So maybe put a notch to join your side seam up. So you'll need a notch here. You'll need it on the other side. When I do the production pattern, I will show you where you're going to put all of your notches for that. Okay, so I've got all my pieces cut. Here was my working pattern that I started with, and here is my skirt front. You can see I haven't cut on the outer edges yet, but I've got my seam allowance. I've only put a 1/2 inch seam allowance on here. That's all I really felt that I wanted. I've got my darts marked in, so now I'm going to put some notches in here. I will cut my sides down to show you that. So I've used my low hip line as my side notch mark on both the front and back. So this is the mark that you will, when you cut your skirt out and you're sewing it up, you're going to line up your front and back at the sides. So I'm going to cut and I'm going to notch here. So I've got my notches here for my darts. This might be the place where I decide I'm going to put an awl mark so that I can stop my dart when I mark it. Instead of tracing marking on here, I'll have a hole in my fabric through with this pierce that is a 1/2 inch above. There's the bottom of the dart. So I'm just going to do an awl mark a 1/2 inch above. So I'll put that mark on my fabric. I'm going to do the same one over on this side because you can see I've got my grain line. I've written on here skirt front, put my name on it, and this is the high-low pattern. Cut 1. This is really important too, right side up. So I want this pattern piece sitting on the right side of my fabric. Okay, so I would also do an awl mark, like a notch right here. So I'd also do an awl mark here. I'm going to put or not an awl mark, I'm also going to put a notch here. I'm going to notch the top of my darts so I know where they are. You can put a notch on your center front. I will do the pattern for the facing next. I just want to get the actual skirt pattern pieces done. So that's my front. So now here is my back piece. So here's my pattern where I've added my seam allowances. I've got my grain line, I've got my dart. From where my zipper is going to be, because I'm going to cut 2 here, I'm going to have 1/2 inch seam allowance up to the base of where my zipper. So where my zipper is going in, I've given myself 3/4 inch. I can always trim that down after, but I like a little bit bigger seam allowance for my zipper. I've got marks here, which I'm going to notch out. So I'm going to notch these. I'm going to notch my hip here. I'm going to notch my dart do an all mark again for my center back. Then here's the flounce piece for the front, and here is my pattern piece for it. So I've just taken and traced it all out, added a seam allowance along it. I've got my notch here that corresponds to the notch in the front of my skirt. On here I've got my grain line, I've written skirt flounce front, cut 1, right side up again. We want this to be cut on the right side because this notch, if you cut it reverse, your notch is going to be over here and it's going to have nothing to go to. So I've got that piece. Then here is my skirt back pattern. So remember, I'm cutting this on the fold. So what I did was I took my paper and I folded it and I've lined it up so I've got my pattern here. Now I haven't drawn all my seam line or stitching lines, but all of this perforated line here is all the stitching line. So again, a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. For the skirt hem, I'm actually going to do just a narrow, probably a rolled hem on my serger, or maybe just a narrow hem on it. So you want to make sure that's good. One thing you want to check, and I see I've got a little bit of a blip. If you look at my pattern here, you might be able to see how there's just a little bit of a little spot here it raises up. You might want to correct this right now. It's just possibly where I've had the pattern laid out. I've missed having it directly on the fold by a little bit. So I'm just going to actually just fix this up. And what I would do is I just add this little spot in here just to kind of have this line nice and smooth. So then I'm just going to cut this out and just have my line all smoothed out here. Okay, so you see now this hem curve is nice and smooth. So on here again, skirt flounce back, cut 1 right side out, because this piece is going to go across the back. So this is all going to fit along the back. I've got my notches here, my center back notch, which will match up to the seam line. So I'm going to cut 1 of these. So these are all my pieces all ready to go and cut out on my fabric. The only thing I have to do next is actually make the pieces for the facing for the waistband. So the last pieces I want to make are my facings for my my skirt at the top. I'm not going to add a waistband. I'm going to have it come to my waist, but I'm not going to have it go above. So what I've done is I've taken my front piece, and you only have to do this on the fold. You can cut your facing out on the fold. You're going to cut 1 piece for the front on the fold and 2 pieces for the back. So what I've done is I've measured across here 2 inches down, all the way down from the top at the dart here, and I'm going to actually just cut this right along this line all the way across. Okay, so I can move that out of the way. Actually, because I had this a whole piece, so I'm just going to deal with the back. So you can see I've got it cut here. So what I want to do now is I want to fold out this dart, because I don't need to have this dart in my facing, because it will be sewn out of the skirt, so I won't need to have it here. So now that I've got it folded out, I can take and I can just trim off anything that doesn't line up here. So now I'm ready to make my pattern piece for this. So I'll lay this down on a piece of paper, add my 1/2 inch seam allowances all the way around. You can add another 1/2 inch to the bottom. Actually, I don't usually. 2 inches is as deep as I want it when it's finished. So I will trace that all out in a minute and show you the finished production pattern. Here is my back piece. Same thing. I've taken and I've measured down 2 inches. What you want to do before you go ahead and cut is mark. Actually, I don't need to mark that on the fold. I'm going to mark a grain line because I'm going to cut 2 here, but I just want to make sure my center back is marked so that I don't confuse it with the side. So same thing, I'm going to cut this out right along that 2 inch line. Then I'm going to take my dart and I'm going to fold it out so that it's as if it was sewn. Tape it closed. And again, just take and true up your bottom so that you've got a nice smooth line at the bottom. You may have to do it at the top as well. So there's my back piece. So they're all ready to go. So I'll take a piece of paper here and I'm going to lay this out on top. I'm going to take and trace all around here. Now you want to use your rulers and make sure that you're truing all of this up. So, grain line. Now, for this one, seam allowance, like I say, I'm not going to put anything on the bottom, but I am going to open this up so you can see it a little bit better. I am going to, on my center back, I'm going to add 3/4 of an inch, just like I have on my back there, and I'll just join the bottom up there. For the top, so I want to make sure my grain line is right. I've obviously, when I just hand drew that, you can see why you need to use a ruler, because there, if you look at that one, this one is wrong. It's a little bit too off. So I'm going to add my 1/2 inch seam allowance to the side. There again, make sure that your ruler is lined right up with your stitching line. I'm going to add a 1/2 inch across the top. So there's my cutting line. So this is my back facing. This is my skirt. You can put high-low on here, whatever you want. You want to put cut 2 and interface. Okay, because this is a facing, we're going to put interfacing in this too. Okay, so you want to make sure that you interface it. So there's my back facing piece to cut out. I'm going to do the exact same thing for my front. Trace all around it. It doesn't need a seam allowance at the front, it only needs a seam allowance at the side and across the top because it's getting cut on a fold. So I'm going to put a fold line cut here. I'm going to add my 1/2 inch, and you're going to use your ruler and you're going to be exact, not just freehand it. Okay, so this is front facing for my skirt. Cut 1 on fold and interface again. Okay, so there's all my pattern pieces all ready to go. Now I'm all set to make sure my fabric has been washed and ready to lay out, and I'll show you how to pin all this out and we'll cut out our skirts.